The sun hung low over the frontier town, casting long shadows across the dusty market square. It was a late spring morning, the air still cool, though the promise of summer's heat was close. The smell of fresh bread mixed with the earthy scent of the horses tethered. Nearby, vendors shouted over one another, offering everything from cured meats to handcrafted goods. But in the center of it all, Alexa Morland knelt on a tattered blanket, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged the few tools left to her. Each one had been his. Samuel's, the hammers, the saws, the chisels, all symbols of his hard work, of the life they had built together. The small leather pouch of coins by her side was proof of her desperation. She hadn't eaten in 3 days. She hadn't eaten much in the past month, to be honest. But the thought of parting with Samuel's tools, the only thing she had left of him, made her feel as though she was burying him a second time. Her heart clenched as she picked up a worn chisel. She could still picture Samuel's strong hands, callous from years of building their cabin, the laughter in his eyes as he explained how to fix the roof, how to carve the beams just so. But now those same hands are gone, buried under the cold earth, and all she had left were these tools. Even if they had been the foundation of her life, they were now her last hope for survival. A deep sigh escaped her as she picked up the hand-carved saw. It had been his pride. He'd made it himself, and it had saved them countless hours of work. She set it down with great care, as if handling a fragile treasure, even though it no longer felt like one. It was a mere item now, something to sell, something to trade for food. A lump formed in her throat as she glanced over at the small, crumbling cabin at the edge of the square. There was nothing left there, no warmth, no Samuel. As her fingers brushed against the cool metal of the level, the last tool to be sold, a pair of boots drew her attention. A tall man, weathered and strong-looking, had stepped into view. His presence was unmistakable. There was an aura about him that commanded attention without effort. He stood at the edge of the square, observing her, his broad frame unmoving as though he could see straight through the blanket, through the tools, into the depths of her grief. Alexa felt the heat of her embarrassment rise in her cheeks. She quickly turned away, focusing on the tool in her hands, but she could feel his gaze lingering. His presence felt different than the usual market crowds, where others merely looked. He seemed to feel what she was going through. It unsettled her. If she could not shake the feeling that his gaze, steady and kind, understood the weight of what she was doing, she forced her focus back to the task at hand, setting down the level with trembling fingers. As she did, a voice broke through the noise of the square. "Miss, those were fine tools you had." Alexa flinched, her heart pounding as she looked up. The man had crossed the square slowly and deliberately, his hat held respectfully in his hand. His gaze was quiet but direct, and his voice was soft but firm. "They've all been sold," she said quickly, trying to steady her breath, her words too rushed. "I have nothing left." The rancher didn't seem put off by her words. Instead, his face softened with something she couldn't place. Pity? No, he didn't pity her. There was no condescension in his eyes, only a quiet understanding, as if he knew more than she could explain in a few words. "I'll buy them all back," he said, his voice deep and calm. "At twice what you were paid." Alexa's mind spun. Twice? Why would he offer that? And why now? Her gaze flickered between him and the tools, suspicion creeping in. Was this some sort of charity? Was he mocking her? The last thing she wanted was pity, but his eyes weren't mocking. They weren't pitying either. Instead, they were steady, as though he had seen too much grief to be anything but honest. "I'm a rancher," he continued, sensing her hesitation. "Good tools are hard to find." She blinked, still uncertain. This wasn't what she'd expected. She had thought maybe he'd buy the tools and leave without a second thought. But now he was offering to buy them all back at a price that made no sense, with no promise of anything in return. "And what's the catch?" she asked, her voice tight. "What do you want from me?" His lips curled into the smallest of smiles. And for a moment, Alexa felt a strange, uncomfortable feeling in her chest. He wasn't doing this out of some misplaced kindness. No, there was something else. Something that made her weary and yet hopeful. I have a question first, he said, his gaze steady as he locked eyes with hers. Do you have work, miss? Her breath caught in her throat. Work? What was he offering her? She swallowed hard, her mind whirling as she searched for response. The truth spilled out of her before she could stop it. No, no work, no family, no home. His brow furrowed slightly, and for the briefest of moments, Alexa saw something, like empathy in his eyes. I need a cook and a housekeeper. My sister helps, but she's getting on in years. Alexa hesitated. She could feel the pull of his words, the kindness in them, but she didn't trust it. She had been burned too many times before by empty promises. Room board, fair wage, he added gently. Respectful employment. Her mind was a whirl of confusion, suspicion, and a deep, aching need for something to hold onto. She couldn't afford to be too proud. She couldn't afford to turn down what might be the only lifeline she had left. I lost my wife 2 years ago, the rancher said, his voice quieter now. I understand what it means to keep breathing when your heart wants to stop. For the first time, Alexa looked at him not as a stranger offering help, but as someone who knew the weight of grief she carried. He didn't expect her to trust him right away, but he was asking her to survive. And maybe that was something she could do. With slow, careful movements, he reached for her tools, his strong hands working as if they had a purpose beyond just the transaction. One by one, he paid for the tools, paying more than she had ever imagined. He didn't argue with the sellers, didn't haggle. He simply paid with quiet dignity. As the last item was returned to her, Samuel's level, he placed it in her hands with a finality that made her heart ache. Keep this. One, he said softly. Some things are too precious to sell. Her hands trembled as she held the tool. Samuel's tool, the one thing that had mattered most. She looked up at the rancher, her eyes filled with something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. She nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them. I'll work for you for 1 month. And with that, the first steps toward new life were taken. As they loaded the tools into his wagon, and she climbed beside him, Alexa couldn't help but wonder what the future might hold. Would she find peace again? Would this strange man, who understood more than anyone, offer her the chance to rebuild? Only time would tell. Dexter's boots crunched against the dust as he walked toward Alexa, his movements slow and deliberate like a man who had spent too many years watching, waiting for something he couldn't quite name. The square was alive with noise, hawkers calling out, children playing, the occasional rattle of wagon wheels, but it was as if a quiet circle had formed around the two of them, with the rest of the world fading into the background. Dexter tipped his hat respectfully as he approached, his tall frame casting a shadow over Alexa as she stood frozen, a mix of exhaustion and weariness in her eyes. Miss, those were fine tools you had, he said, his voice a deep rumble, carrying a quiet authority that made her heart skip. Alexa didn't answer at first. She could barely meet his gaze, her eyes still on the tools scattered on the blanket before her. Her heart hammered in her chest, her thoughts scattered. She was too tired to talk to him. She had nothing left to say. She had just sold everything she owned, the last ties to her late husband, and now a stranger was standing before her, pity in his eyes, no doubt, ready to make some offer of charity that she wouldn't accept. They've all been sold, she muttered, trying to shield herself from whatever kindness he might offer. I have nothing left. Dexter didn't flinch, didn't look away. He studied her with quiet understanding, his face betraying no judgment, only the sort of patience that made her uncomfortable. I'll buy them all back, he said, his tone even, at twice what you were paid. Alexa's head snapped up, her heart fluttering in confusion. Twice. What kind of man would offer such a thing? And why would he do it? She felt a strange rush of hope followed by a rush of suspicion. Charity. She hated the idea of charity. She didn't want his pity, didn't want to feel like some helpless woman who couldn't even take care of herself. Why? She asked before she could stop herself. What do you want to return? Dexter's lips twitched in the smallest of smiles. Not mocking, but understanding. I'm a rancher, he explained calmly, his hands resting at his sides. Good tools are hard to come by. She blinked, not understanding, and he elaborated as if to explain the unspoken. I need them. I've got work to do, and your tools are better than any I can buy. It didn't make sense. Why was he being so kind? Was he looking for something in return? Was this some sort of bargain? But when she looked at him, again, she saw no pity in his eyes, only a quiet strength, the same strength she had once seen in Samuel. He was offering her something, but he wasn't offering it as a favor. He was offering it as a matter of practicality. Alexa didn't know how to respond. Her heart was too full of sorrow and pride, too full of grief for Samuel and the life they had lost. But she couldn't let the tools go. Those were the last pieces of Samuel, the last connection to the man she had loved. Her fingers lingered over the worn wood of the level, the most precious of his creations, the one thing she hadn't yet sold. It felt like a betrayal to even think about letting it go. But I have a question first, Dexter continued, his gaze steady. Do you have work, miss? The question caught her off guard. Work? What did that have to do with anything? She didn't know how to answer. She hadn't had work since Samuel died. She hadn't had anyone to help her, not even a family member. She had no skills beyond what Samuel had taught her. She hadn't known where to turn. And now here was this man asking her about work. His voice was kind, but there was something about the way he asked, something that made her feel as though he wasn't offering her charity, but an opportunity. No, she finally answered, her voice barely above a whisper. No, work, no family, no home. Dexter nodded, his expression softening. I need a cook and housekeeper. My sister helps, but she's getting on in years. I could offer you room, board, and a fair wage. I can't promise you comfort, but I can promise you respect. Alexis stared at him, her mind spinning. She didn't trust. Easily. Didn't want to trust him. It felt too risky too soon. But she couldn't deny that what he was offering was more than she could hope for. She had nothing else. And the thought of going on without a place to stay, without even the most basic of comforts, was too much to bear. But still doubt crept in. Why would you offer me that? She asked quietly, the words heavy with suspicion. Dexter looked at her, his eyes steady and kind, as though he could see the wall she had built around her heart. I lost my wife 2 years ago, he said, his voice quieter now, tinged with a sorrow that mirrored her own. I know it's like to keep breathing when your heart doesn't want to keep moving when all you want to do is stop. She didn't know what to say to that. She had never met anyone who understood. She had never met anyone who spoke of grief so plainly, as if it were something you had to carry, but couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't carried it themselves. She swallowed hard, her throat tight. I don't want to take advantage of you, she whispered more to herself than to him. Dexter gave a small shake of his head, his gaze still unwavering. You won't, he said gently. People always talk. Question is, can you eat while they do? She didn't know how to answer that. The weight of his words pressed down on her. But there was something else there, too. A strange comfort. She didn't trust him. Not fully. But she didn't have anywhere else to turn. Not anymore. Dexter's next words were softer, almost as if he were speaking to himself more than to her. I bought those tools because I couldn't watch you lose everything. But I didn't ask you here. Out of kindness alone. I was losing myself. Hope the wool to keep going. And maybe you can help me find it again. It was too much, too fast. And yet there was something about him that made her want to say yes. For the first time in months, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of the darkness. After a long pause, she nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. 1 month, she whispered. I'll work for you for 1 month. Dexter smiled, the faintest light in his eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough. As they moved through the market, He quietly negotiated with the buyers, paying extra, paying respect, and each time, Alexa watched a part of her breaking free of the cage she had built around her grief. At the end of it all, he returned Samuel's level to her, placing it gently in her hands. "Keep this one," he said. "Some things are too precious to sell." Her heart swelled with gratitude, and for the first time in a long while, hope flickered inside her. The future didn't seem so uncertain. Maybe, just maybe, this man, this stranger, could be the bridge to something new. The wagon creaked as it rolled across the uneven dirt path. The steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves breaking the silence that had settled between Alexa and Dexter. The sun was beginning to dip lower, casting a warm glow over the ranch as they approached. The modest home nestled in the rolling hills. It wasn't much, but to Alexa, it seemed like the most peaceful place she'd seen in months. The ranch was well kept, its buildings sturdy and practical, a stark contrast to the faded and crumbling cabin she had left behind. Dexter guided the horses to a small barn where two men older than him, but still strong, greeted them with nods. Hank and Tom, they were called, and their rough hands seemed to soften when they saw Alexa, as if her presence here, though unexpected, was something they had come to accept without question. "This is Lillian," Dexter said, guiding Alexa toward the porch where an older woman stood. Her silver hair pulled back into a neat bun, her weathered face framed by lines of experience. She was standing with a quiet grace that immediately put Alexa at ease, though there was an intensity to her gaze that seemed to take in everything. "My sister," Dexter added, his tone warmer than she'd heard before. "Lillian, this is Alexa." Lillian studied Alexa for a moment, her eyes softening with the understanding that only someone who had lived through hardship could offer. "You made a good decision, I think," she said simply, her voice low but filled with an unspoken warmth. Alexa nodded, unsure how to respond. Her thoughts scattered as she tried to absorb the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. Lillian led her into a small room near the kitchen, a simple space with a bed, a wash basin, and a window that looked out over the fields. The walls were plain, but there was a feeling of order, of peace that settled over her. It felt safe, a sensation she hadn't known in a long time. She placed Samuel's level on a shelf by the window, the familiar weight of it somehow grounding her in this strange new place. As she unpacked, she couldn't help but feel the hollow ache of his absence. But at the same time, something inside her, something long buried, began to stir. It was the beginning of something. She didn't know it yet, but it was there. That night, as she prepared the first meal for the ranch hands and Dexter, she could almost hear Samuel's voice guiding her. The skills he had taught her, chopping vegetables, seasoning, cooking over wood stove, came back to her as if they had never left. The meal was simple: stew, bread, a few vegetables. But when the ranch hands sat down at the table, Alexa saw the way they looked at her, not with pity, but with respect. Even Dexter, who had remained so quiet since they arrived, gave her a small, approving smile as he took his seat. It wasn't much, but it was enough. That smile, the first genuine one she had seen in a long time, made her feel for the first time in months that maybe she could find a place here. As the evening wore on, and the conversation became more relaxed, Alexa noticed the way Dexter interacted with his ranch hands. Firm but fair, the kind of leader who earned respect not through power, but through quiet dignity. He had a way of carrying himself, of speaking without raising his voice that made people listen. Lillian, too, had a calm presence that seemed to ease the tension in the air. After supper, the three of them sat on the porch, the sky turning dark as the stars began to show. The air was cool and crisp, and for the first time since she had lost Samuel, Alexa felt a kind of peace settle over her. It wasn't a loud peace, but a quiet one, as though the earth itself was holding its breath with her, waiting for her to find her way. Over the next few days, she settled into a rhythm that felt both foreign and familiar. The mornings were spent cooking breakfast for Dexter and the ranch hands, while the afternoons found her tending to small chores around the house. There was always something to do, mending clothes, cleaning, organizing. But as the days passed, Alexa found herself more at ease in the simple routines of ranch life. Dexter would come in for breakfast, nodding at her in acknowledgement before heading out to work the fields. His presence was constant, but there was a respectful distance between them, as if he was giving her the space she needed to settle. In the evenings, they would sit together for supper, the ranch hands often staying longer than they needed to, enjoying the warmth of the house and the steady rhythm of life. There were moments when Alexa would catch Dexter's eye, and she could see something unspoken between them. It wasn't romantic, at least not yet, but it was something deeper, a shared understanding of grief and survival. In those quiet moments, she found herself thinking of Samuel less. Her memories no longer a sharp ache, but a soft, fading shadow in the back of her mind. One afternoon, Dexter asked her to help with a project behind the kitchen. He was building a raised garden box, something Alexa had never done before. But she didn't hesitate. She recognized the tools he carried with him, the ones that had once belonged to Samuel, and she felt a surge of something strange. It was as if she could feel Samuel's presence in the familiar weight of the hammer in her hands, the sound of the nails being driven into the wood. It felt right, like this was what Samuel would have wanted for his tools to be used to. Build something, to grow something, to create life instead of sitting and used. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Dexter stepped back to admire the garden box they had built together. Alexa stood beside him, her hands on her hips, the scent of fresh wood filling the air. It was a small thing, a simple box to hold herbs and vegetables. But to her, it felt like a victory. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was building, creating, taking part in something that had the potential to grow. For the first time in months, Alexa felt like she had a future. She was no longer just a widow clinging to the past, but a woman with a purpose. Your husband's tools should be used, not stored, Dexter said quietly, almost as if reading her thoughts. He was a craftsman. He'd want them building life, not gathering dust. She swallowed, hard, fighting the lump in her throat. I'm not betraying him, she said, softly, more to herself than to him. Dexter didn't respond, but the quiet smile on his face said it all. That night, as Alexis sat on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one, she realized something. She wasn't sure where this path was leading or what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that it could lead somewhere. Good. Maybe, just maybe, she could heal here. Maybe she could rebuild. And maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. The air was thick with dust as the wagon rumbled down the dirt road, the sound of hooves steady and rhythmic against the ground. Alexa sat quietly beside Dexter, her hands folded in her lap as the landscape of the ranch faded into the distance. Lillian sat across from them, her gaze distant, but the sense of peace that had settled over Alexa in the last few weeks felt fragile now. They were heading into town for a supply run, a task that felt mundane in its simplicity. But Alexa couldn't help but feel uneasy. The closer they got to town, the more the gnawed in her stomach twisted. Townspeople knew too much, or at least they thought they did. Gossip spread faster than the heat of a summer afternoon. Dexter's presence beside her was reassuring, but the unease in her chest remained. As the wagon crested a small hill and the town square came into view, Alexa could feel the eyes of the town on them even before they arrived. A few familiar faces were already gathered at the general store, exchanging words and glances, and she felt a sudden flush of discomfort. She had never liked the way people looked at her, especially since Samuel had died. But now there was something different, something that made her feel exposed, like an animal under scrutiny. The wagon came to a halt in front of the general store, and Dexter swung down first, offering his hand to Alexa. She hesitated for a moment before taking it, her fingers brushing against his rough skin. His hand was steady, unshaken, and it comforted her just enough to push through the thick air of uncertainty that clung to her. Lillian climbed down behind them, and the three of them made their way into the store, the bell above the door ringing as they entered. The store was bustling with activity, but it didn't take long for Alexa to notice the way people paused. When they saw her, the way their conversations seemed to falter. She couldn't help but overhear snippets of whispers sharp and pointed. Did you hear? She's living with that rancher not. Even a year after her husband died. Poor Samuel must be turning in his grave. The words were a knife to her chest, but she kept her head high, pretending she hadn't heard. She focused on the shelves, on the jars and cans, anything to keep herself occupied. But it was hard to ignore the looks, the subtle shift in the air as the gossip spread. Like wildfire, as she moved toward the back of the store, a familiar voice caught her ear. Well, if it ain't Dexter Hale with his new pet project. It was Cliff Rowan, a neighboring rancher known for his sharp tongue and ever-watchful eyes. Alexa could feel her stomach tighten as she turned to face him. Cliff's smug smile was all too familiar, and she knew he had been watching them from the moment they arrived. His gaze flicked over to her, his eyes gleaming with something that was less curiosity and more judgment. I see you've taken in a charity case. Cliff continued, his voice louder now, carrying through the store. What's next, Dexter? Going to start a rescue mission for every widow in the territory. His words stoned, and Alexa's pulse quickened as she felt the heat of embarrassment rise in her cheeks. She wanted to say something to snap back at him, but the words caught in her throat. Dexter stepped forward, his voice calm, but laced with an edge of warning. Cliff, you need to watch your words. But Cliff wasn't done. He was like a wolf circling, looking for weakness. I'm just offering friendly advice. Hale, he sneered. Widows are clever when it comes to landing a security blanket. You might want to be careful. She's got her hooks in you already, doesn't she? Alexa's heart pounded in her chest, and she felt the weight of his words settle over her like a cloak she couldn't shake off. She had never been one to care much for gossip, but there was something about Cliff's words, about the way they felt, like a public accusation that made her feel small, like her grief wasn't enough, like she was something less for trying to move on. Dexter's jaw tightened, and Alexa could see the controlled anger in his eyes. He had always been a man of few words, but when he spoke now, it was with an authority that made the air crackle. You don't know a damn thing about what's been going on in my life, Rowan, Dexter said, his voice low but full of steel. Keep your opinions to yourself. Cliff's smile faltered for a moment, but it quickly returned thin and insincere. Oh, I know. Enough, he said with a wave of his hand. I know that widows are always looking for someone to fix their broken hearts. And I know you've got a good heart, Dexter. Don't let her take advantage of it. Alexa felt her breath catch in her throat as the words sank in. She wasn't the one who had chosen this. She hadn't come here to take anything from Dexter, but the judgment in Cliff's eyes, the insinuations in his words, made her feel as though her every move was under a microscope. I think we've heard enough from you, Dexter growled, stepping forward and putting himself between Alexa and Cliff. Get off my land, Rowan. You're not welcome here anymore. Cliff's expression darkened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he simply snorted and turned on his heel, making his way out of the store with a final glance over his shoulder. Alexa didn't move. Not at first. She stood frozen, the weight of his words still hanging in the air. She wanted to speak, to say something to Dexter, but her throat felt tight, her voice stuck. She didn't know what to feel. She wasn't sure if she felt ashamed or angry or just lost. The rest of the day passed in a haze for Alexa, her thoughts clouded by the confrontation. As they made their way back to the wagon, she felt the sting of the gossip follow her, seeping into her bones. It wasn't just the town that had noticed her living with Dexter. It was the judgment. She didn't belong here. Not really. As the wagon rolled toward the ranch, she sat silently, her gaze fixed on the road ahead. She didn't want to hear what people were saying, but it seemed like the whispers were already too loud to ignore. By the time they reached the ranch, the weight of it all felt unbearable. She could feel the walls closing in around her. That night, as she unpacked the supplies they had bought, her hands shook with uncertainty. The doubts she had pushed away were now impossible to ignore. Was she taking advantage of Dexter's kindness? Was she a burden? Could she ever truly fit in here? Or would the gossip follow her wherever she went? Her hard act, not just for Samuel, but for the woman she had become. The next morning, the weight of the previous day's events clung to Alexa like the dust on the wind. The tension in her chest gnawing at her resolve. She moved through the morning routine like a shadow, her hands mechanically preparing breakfast while her mind wrestled with the thoughts that had taken root the night before. The gossip, the judgment, the insinuations of those who didn't know her, or the pain she had carried. It all seemed to crowd her mind. Dexter hadn't said much that morning, giving her space, but the silence between them was palpable. He had been kind, offering her room and respect, but she couldn't shake the feeling that no matter how hard she tried, she would never be able to outrun the shadows of her past. After breakfast, while the ranch hands set out for the fields, Alexa found herself drawn to the barn, the quiet of it offering a temporary reprieve from the storm inside her. The barn smelled of hay and wood, a mixture that was oddly comforting. But as she stepped inside, she found herself caught off guard by the sight of Dexter. He was standing near a stall, his back turned, his head bowed, as if he were deep in thought. For a long moment, she stood still, watching him, unsure of what to say, uncertain of what he expected of her now. He hadn't tried to comfort her after the confrontation with Cliff hadn't made promises that everything would be all right, and that in its own way was a relief. He didn't offer empty words. He didn't try to play her, but as the silence stretched on, it became clear that the weight of the unspoken had become too much for both of them to bear. Finally, Dexter broke the quiet. "I never meant for you to feel like you had to justify your place here," he said, his voice low, the words almost lost in the space between them. "But I can see it now. You're carrying something heavy, more than just what happened between us and that man in town. And you think you're doing something wrong by being here, by accepting what I've offered. But it's not wrong, Alexa." His words caught her off guard, and for a moment, all she could do was stare at him as if trying to understand what he was saying. It was as though he had seen through every layer she had built around herself, every wall she had carefully constructed. She had been bracing herself for rejection, for judgment. But instead, Dexter was offering her something she hadn't expected, understanding. "It's not wrong to survive," he continued, his voice steady, but laced with the pain of his own grief. "I know what it's like to feel like you don't deserve happiness. Like every breath you take after you lose someone is a betrayal. But it's not. It's not a betrayal of Samuel. It's not a betrayal of anyone. You're allowed to live, Alexa. You're allowed to breathe." Her breath hitched as his words sank in as the dam she had built up inside her finally began to crack. The truth of it hit her like a wave of force that knocked the wind from her lungs. She hadn't realized how tightly she had been holding on to the guilt until he spoke. The guilt of moving on, of surviving when Samuel couldn't. The guilt of feeling something, anything that wasn't bound by her sorrow. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides as she fought to hold back the tears that were threatening to spill. "I wasn't there," she whispered, her voice breaking. "When Samuel died, I should have been there. I should have done more. I could have saved him." Dexter's expression softened, and he took a small step toward her, his voice gentle but firm. "You didn't fail him, Alexa. You didn't cause what happened. That being falling, that wasn't your fault. You did the best you could with what you had. And sometimes the best isn't enough. But that doesn't mean you didn't try. That doesn't mean you didn't love him." Alexa's chest tightened, the weight of his words pressing against the wall she had built around her heart. She had never allowed herself to hear the truth, had never let herself accept the possibility that she wasn't responsible for Samuel's death. But now, in the quiet of the barn, with Dexter standing before her, she felt a flicker of something. Something like hope, something like release. But the hope was fleeting and the guilt was still there. Stubborn and unyielding. She swallowed hard, trying to compose herself. She wasn't sure how to deal with the emotions churning inside her. Wasn't sure if she was ready to let go of the pain. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I'm scared of letting myself feel anything. I'm scared of moving on, of letting him go. What if I forget him? What if I stop caring? Dexter's gaze was steady, unshaken by her vulnerability. He took another small step closer, his presence comforting in its quiet certainty. You won't forget him, he said simply. Not as long as you live, but you can't carry his memory like a weight around your neck. That's not living. That's surviving. And you deserve more than survival, Alexa. You deserve a chance to find peace, to build something good from what's left. His words settled into her like seeds taking root in her soul. She didn't have all the answers, didn't know what the future would hold. But for the first time since Samuel's death, she could imagine a life beyond the pain. She could imagine a life where she wasn't just surviving, but living. I don't know how to do that, she whispered, her voice small and uncertain. I don't know how to stop feeling guilty for everything. Dexter's expression softened, and he stepped forward, placing a hand gently on her shoulder, his touch firm but not overpowering. You don't have to have all the answers right now, he said quietly. You just have to keep moving, one step at a time. And if you ever feel like you can't go any further, I'll be here. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm just asking you to keep going. Alexa nodded slowly, a tear slipping down her cheek as she finally let herself feel the weight of his words. She wasn't alone in this anymore. She wasn't alone in her grief. And maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to let go of the guilt and start living again. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight. But for the first time in a long time, she felt the flicker of something that had been buried deep inside her. A flicker of hope, and it was enough. 3 months had passed since Alexa had first stepped foot on the Hale Ranch. And though the days blended together in a routine that was as simple as it was comforting, there was an undeniable shift in the air. The house had slowly started to feel like a home again. A feeling Alexa wasn't sure she'd ever experienced after Samuel's death. The mornings were spent with her cooking breakfast for Dexter and the ranch hands. The routine, so familiar now, almost felt like it had always been her place to fill. Her hands, once stiff and uncertain in the kitchen, now moved with a confidence that matched the rhythm of life on the ranch. The ranch hands, Hank and Tom, had long since warmed to her, their gruff but good-hearted nature making it clear they respected her. Dexter had remained, as always, quiet but present. He never hovered, but his steady presence had become a comforting constant, something she had begun to rely on without even realizing it. He still treated her with respect, never pushing, never rushing. The space between them had shifted from awkward distance to something warmer, though neither of them acknowledged it aloud. They had both experienced loss, and in that silence, they found an unspoken understanding that needed no words. On the surface, everything was calm. Everything was steady, but Alexa could feel the tension that remained between them like a thread, just barely holding things together. It wasn't that they didn't enjoy each other's company, but the question that hovered over everything was clear. What was this? What were they becoming? The nights were the hardest. After supper, as the ranch hands finished their work and the evenings stretched on, the quiet of the house would settle in. Lillian would retreat to her room, leaving Alexa and Dexter alone in the stillness. There had been no declarations, no promises, just the unspoken pull between them, the small moments when their eyes would meet, when Alexa would catch herself lingering too long in his presence. One evening after supper, Dexter had asked her to help him with something behind the house. It was a small garden project, a simple task, but the way he had asked, gentle, respectful, as if testing the waters, had sent a flutter through her chest. They worked side by side, digging, planting, and for the first time in a long time, Alexa found herself smiling freely. The weight of her grief for Samuel feeling less like a burden and more like a distant memory. The garden box was small, but filled with promise. As they worked, Dexter's steady presence beside her gave her the courage to speak the words that had been lingering on the tip of her tongue. "You know," she said softly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "Samuel used to talk about building a garden. He always said we'd have a vegetable garden behind the house, but we never had the time." Dexter stopped, his hands frozen in mid-motion as he looked at her. She could see the question in his eyes, the quiet curiosity. "He was a craftsman," she continued, her voice soft. "He liked to make things with his hands. Sometimes I think you have loved to see this, to see a garden, something growing, something alive." Dexter's expression softened, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was something in the air between them, an understanding, a shared grief, a bond that had formed without either of them realizing it. Dexter's voice, when it came, was low and steady. "He'd be proud of you, Alexa. You've done more than just survive. You're building something, and that's something worth honoring." She met his gaze, and for a moment, there was no more distance between them, no more uncertainty. There was only the quiet space where their grief had met, where had merged into something else, something new. They finished the garden box together, and though it was small, Alexa found herself standing back, looking at the patch of earth with a sense of accomplishment. It was a small thing, but it felt monumental. It felt like a turning point. That night, as the stars came out and the cool air settled over the ranch, they sat on the porch side by side. The evening was peaceful, and Alexa found herself feeling a warmth she hadn't known in a long time. There was a quiet comfort in the stillness between them, a sense that things didn't have to be complicated, that maybe, just maybe, they were both healing in their own way. Lillian had said it once. "You two dance around each other like scared horses," and Alexa had laughed at the time, but now she understood. There had been hesitation, yes, there had been fear of moving too quickly, of letting the past go. But in the weeks that had passed, in the moments when they had worked side by side, shared simple meals, and exchanged quiet glances, Alexa had started to see that maybe this was the kind of peace she had been looking for. Not the peace of forgetting Samuel, not the peace of erasing the pain, but the peace of living despite the grief. Dexter had lost his wife, Margaret, just as she had lost Samuel. And there was something in that shared sorrow that had forged a bond between them. They were survivors, and maybe that was enough. The following days were filled with small gestures of care. Dexter bringing in firewood without being asked. Alexa fixing his torn shirt without thinking. They shared simple moments of kindness. Nothing too intimate, but enough to make the other feel seen, understood. The space between them had shifted once again, but it was still delicate, still unspoken. She could feel herself starting to trust him more, starting to let go of the wall she had built. There were still moments of doubt, of fear, but they were fewer now, fading in the light of the steady life she was building. The ranch had become a place where hope could take root, and with each passing day, she felt herself growing, not just as a woman, but as someone who could be a part of something again. Not just surviving, but living, maybe even loving again. Dexter had been patient with her, and for the first time, she could see the possibility of something more between them. They were both different than they had been when they met, both scarred by loss, but also healed in small ways by the quiet, steady rhythm of ranch life. Alexa wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to find out. Maybe they could build something together, something stronger than the grief they had both been carrying. She glanced over at Dexter, his gaze focused on the horizon, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a future. A future with him. The morning sun stretched across the ranch, its golden light spilling over the land like a promise. Alexa stood in the doorway of the house, watching the world wake up, feeling the cool morning air kiss her skin. It was the first time in a long time she didn't feel the heavy weight of grief pressing down on her. The past few months had been a quiet sort of healing built not on grand gestures, but on small, consistent moments of peace that had allowed her to find her way again. The sound of footsteps behind her brought her attention back to the present, and she turned to see Dexter approaching, his face set in that quiet, steady way she had come to appreciate. There was no rushing in his movements, no impatience, just a calm certainty. "I thought you might want to see something," he said, his voice low and even with a hint of something she couldn't quite place. He held something in his hand, something small but meaningful. And when she reached out to take it, she recognized the familiar gleam of Samuel's level. It felt like a lifetime ago that she had handed it over, parting with the one piece of Samuel that had meant the most to her. She hadn't expected to ever see it again. But here it was gently placed. In her hands, a symbol of something long lost now returned. "I thought you should have this," Dexter said, his voice quiet but firm. "Some things are too important to stay gone." She felt a lump rise in her throat as she turned the level over in her hands, the weight of it grounding her in the moment. She hadn't realized how much she had missed it, how much she had missed the feeling of connection to Samuel. But here with Dexter holding something that had been his, it felt as though she was being given the chance to honor the past without being buried by it. "I've been thinking a lot," Dexter continued, his words deliberate, as if he had been planning them for some time, "about what comes next for both of us." Alexa's heart skipped her chest, unsure of where his words were leading, unsure of what this moment would mean. For months, they had moved carefully around each other, their shared grief binding them together in a way words never could, but never quite crossing that line into something deeper. She knew this moment could change everything. Dexter took a step closer, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that sent a wave of warmth through her. "We've both been through a lot," he said softly, "and I don't expect you to forget what you lost or to leave it behind, but I can't help but wonder if we could build something new together. Maybe not just this ranch, but something more, something that lasts." Alexa's breath caught in her throat, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had spent so long holding on to the past, convinced that moving forward meant betraying the memory of Samuel. But now, with Dexter standing before her, offering not just his words, but his heart, something inside her shifted. She had been so afraid of loving again, of feeling anything that might take her away from the memory of Samuel. But here was Dexter, someone who understood grief in a way few others did, offering her a chance to build a future, to honor both the past and what was still to come. She reached out slowly, taking his hand in hers, her fingers trembling slightly as they intertwined. "I don't know what the future holds," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "but I want to find out with you." Dexter's face softened, and for the first time he smiled fully. The kind of smile that reached his eyes and lit up his whole face. The quiet strength that had always been there was now laced with something else, something deeper, something more. "Then we'll figure out together," he said, his voice filled with a warmth that made her feel as though the weight of the world had been lifted, even if just for a moment. The ranch had been the place where she had started to rebuild her life. But now, standing here with Dexter holding his hand, she realized it wasn't just the land that had become her foundation. It was the man beside her. There was still so much to figure out, so many unknowns ahead. But for the first time, Alexa didn't feel lost. She felt like she had a place in this world again. A place she could call her own. A place where love wasn't something to be afraid of. As the days passed there, relationship deepened in small, quiet ways. They worked side by side, repairing fences, planting new crops in the garden, and fixing up the small barn that had always needed attention. They laughed together, shared moments of silence. And in those moments, Alexa could feel herself falling into a new rhythm. The rhythm of a life she hadn't thought possible. A life that held both the memory of Samuel and the promise of something new. One evening, as they stood together in the garden, the last rays of sunlight fading into the horizon, Dexter took her hand once more. This time, there was no hesitation in his touch, no uncertainty. He simply held her hand, looking into her eyes, with a quiet intensity that made her heart race. "Alexa," he began, his voice low, "I've been thinking about something. I want to build something with you. Not just a ranch, not just a garden, but a life, a future." Alexa's breath caught in her throat as she looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. "What are you saying?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Dexter smiled, the light from the setting sun catching the edges of his face. "I'm saying I want you by my side, not just today, but for the rest of our lives. I want to build something with you, something that lasts." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their meaning. And for a moment, Alexa couldn't breathe. But then, slowly, she nodded, a smile breaking through the uncertainty. "I like that," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I like that very much." It wasn't a grand declaration, but it was enough. It was more than enough. They had both been broken by loss, but here, together, they had found something worth building, something that could endure, something that could grow. The morning of the wedding arrived crisp and clear. The sky above the ranch, a perfect blue. Alexa stood in front of the small, cracked mirror in her room, the soft light from the window casting gentle shadows across her face. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted the simple white dress. The one Lillian had helped her make from the fabric they had found in town. The lace veil passed down from Margaret rested on her head, a beautiful connection to the past that wasn't a weight, but a gift. There was a tenderness in every stitch, every movement of the fabric that whispered the memory of the woman who had raised Dexter, who had lived and loved fiercely, just as Alexa had. The past had been woven into the fabric of her dress and her heart, and she no longer feared it. It was part of her. It was part of Dexter. As she turned, looking over her shoulder toward the window, she saw him standing there. Dexter had been busy most of the morning helping with the final preparations. But now, as he stood in the doorway there, eyes met, and everything else seemed to fade away. He was wearing his best shirt, the one he'd saved for special occasions, and there was a quiet awe in his expression as he took in the sight of her. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Words didn't seem necessary. They had spent so much time together building, rebuilding, learning, and growing that this moment when the world felt still was enough. She smiled, the kind of smile that started in her heart and lit up her face. "You look beautiful," Dexter said, his voice low, filled with warmth and admiration. It was a simple compliment, but for Alexa, it meant everything. She felt seen, truly seen in a way she hadn't in years. "You're not so bad yourself," she teased, her voice playful, but full of the same affection. Lillian entered the room, her presence calm and steady as always. She adjusted the veil with practiced hands, smoothing the lace down. "Her niece is back. He's waiting for you," she said gently, a smile on her lips as she gave Alexa one last look. "You're ready?" Alexa nodded, a wave of emotion washing over her. She wasn't just ready for this moment. She was ready for the life that was waiting for her beyond it. The life with Dexter, the life they would build together. With Lillian's help, Alexa made her way down the hall, her steps slow but certain. Outside, the ranch hands and a few neighbors had gathered, standing in a circle beneath the arch trellis that had been built using Samuel's tools. A quiet tribute to the past. The wild roses Margaret had once planted were now in full bloom, their fragrance filling the air, creating a sweet, gentle atmosphere that felt like a celebration of both past and future. Dexter stood at the front, his face soft, almost nervous as he waited for her. He looked every bit the man she had come to love, steady, patient, and kind. But there was something new in him today. Hope. As she approached him, their eyes locked, and Alexa felt the years of pain, the loss, the doubts, all meld away in the presence of the man who had shown her that it was possible to live again. The minister, a quiet man from a nearby town, smiled gently as Alexa took her. Placed beside Dexter, their hands brushing, the warmth of his skin grounding her. The ceremony was simple, but filled with meaning. There were no grand speeches, no elaborate promises, but the vows they exchanged were filled with the depth of their shared understanding. Dexter's vow was simple, but it spoke to the foundation they had built together. I promise to honor your past while building our future. 2. Remember Samuel with you and to let Margaret guide us. Alexa's voice trembled as she spoke her vows. Her words heartfelt and sincere. I promise to bring life to this home, to choose hope even when fear whispers, to love you with everything I've rebuilt myself to be. When they exchanged rings, Dexter slid his grandmother's ring on her finger, and Alexa offered him the one piece of jewelry she had left, her late mother's ring, a simple band she had kept all these years. Their hands fit together just as their hearts did. The minister pronounced them husband and wife, and as they kissed beneath the trellis, the crowd cheered. The quiet celebration of two people finding each other in the midst of pain. The reception was small, with only a handful of people from the community, but the warmth in the air was palpable. Lillian beamed with pride, and even Hank and Tom raised a toast in their honor. Alexa felt a sense of belonging she hadn't known in years, a sense of peace that came not from forgetting the past, but from embracing it and using it to build something new. As the evening wore on, Dexter and Alexa slipped away from the crowd, walking hand in hand toward the porch with a soft sound of crickets and the rustling of the wind through the trees created a serene backdrop. The moonlight bathed the ranch in a soft glow, casting long shadows over the land. Dexter paused at the edge of the porch, turning toward Alexa with a smile that reached his eyes. This is just the beginning, you know, he said, his voice low. There's so much more to come. Alexa nodded, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. I know, she whispered, leaning into him. And I'm ready. 1 year later, their ranch was thriving. The garden had grown. Samuel's tools were proudly displayed in the small workshop, and Margaret's roses bloomed alongside new varieties. They had built something together, something stronger than either of them could have imagined. And as Alexa rocked in the chair beside Dexter, a gentle smile on her lips, she knew their future was as bright as the sun setting over the hills. The family they had created was built on love, honor, and a willingness to move forward without forgetting the past. And when their first child arrived, they knew they would teach their child about both Samuel and Margaret, about the love and lessons that had shaped them. They'll know both of them, Alexis said softly, her hand resting on her growing belly. They're part of our story. Dexter kissed her forehead, his arm around her waist. And they'll have a story of their own, he said, his voice filled with promise. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the two of them sat in silence, their hands entwined, ready to face whatever came next.